always believed in miracles.
Greater protection for people of religious faith.
Every single proposal for protection of religious freedoms was voted down today.
I think the coalition is facing a tough sell on this bill over the next few months, and that's because church leaders want religious freedom protection.
Are we going to impose more threats and violence on our streets if we give that religious freedom to an ideology that I believe is political?
Without religious liberty, we are doomed.
Ban the burqa in Australia.
The first serious bit of legislation that the new government puts into this parliament is for the most radical abortion laws in this country.
Go and buy some non-halal Easter eggs and chocolate and have a happy Easter, everyone.
Leaders, as we've seen in recent times, come and go, but I think your faith hopefully is forever.
We are an amazing country of amazing people. God bless Australia.
Welcome to another episode of Faith and Politics. I'm your host for this show, Reverend Jake Zabel of the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia, which is a member congregation of the Confessional Orthodox Evangelical Lutheran Communion. I am also a host of the Order of Knight George, which is an Australian Lutheran media ministry. We do a whole range of different podcasts and videos and books and papers. You can find our content either on our website at www.knightgeorge.info or just look up the Order of Knight George on either SoundCloud, iTunes or YouTube. You'll be able to find our content there. And so Faith and Politics is one of the newest podcasts produced by the Order of Knight George, which is a show where we introduce different Australian politicians about their faith and their political views. And so on today's episode, we are joined by Queensland State Member of Parliament, Fiona Simpson. Fiona, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, thanks very much, Zeke. It's great to join you. I'm fortunate to represent the state seat of Maroochydore on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, and I have held that role since 1992, and I love my area, but it's always... the honour to represent people is more than just a number of words, and particularly during some of the challenges we've been through lately, you really are there in a very much a service role. So I love my work and I love my community.
That's great. So we'll get underway then with the questions. The first question is, what denomination do you belong to?
Right, I actually belong to a church called Suncoast Christian Outreach Centre, and actually it's Suncoast Christian Church, part of the Christian Outreach Centre denomination, but I consider myself more non-denominational in respect to my leanings as a Christian, but that's my home church, and it's been part of my family for a few decades, but I am fortunate to have a lot of friendships and fellowship with people across many different Christian denominations.
So just on that then, theologically speaking, where in regards of all the difference between Catholicism, Protestantism, Pentecostalism, all that kind of stuff, whereabouts would your church sit theologically?
Well, I guess I'd say I'm out of the Protestant background. My church is Pentecostal, and my personal journey was growing up in a Methodist Presbyterian Uniting Church background, and I still have a lot of friends in those churches. I think also I've really come to appreciate that there are different strengths and obviously different focal points in different denominations. We're actually a lot stronger together. For example, my background's not Catholic, but I've really come to appreciate increasingly the depth of what they bring to the table, and I think they've done a wonderful job with keeping a focus on life issues. There are other denominations that will have a different focal point, and so theologically, I'm not schooled in a deep theological background, but I am obviously influenced by my denominational background. But as I've been on my personal Christian journey since I was a young person, and then living overseas in Asia, where I consider I first really came to an adult faith in Jesus Christ, I was actually living in Japan. So for me, it was realizing Jesus can reach you wherever you are. And I wasn't in a traditional denominational church when I had quite a profound awakening to my faith as an adult. And that's certainly also been very influential in my personal faith journey.
And so the second question that I like to ask people is, how often do you go to church? Are you once a month, once a year, a regular churchgoer? How often would you see yourself attending church?
I am a regular churchgoer. I try to go once a week, though the truth is I don't always get there once a week, but I would certainly be there several times within each month. And as I travel with work, sometimes it'll be in other communities. But through this time of COVID, obviously, it's been really challenging. And so we've been participating in the online community and trying to stay connected with people in other ways. But the online has met a need for a season. And I think we're all just hanging out to be able to fellowship in person, even if it's all socially distanced. It's so important that we can not only support and encourage each other in our own fellowship, but also continue to take that out and supporting people in our community beyond our church walls.
I know a lot of denominations basically have all faced the same issues with the COVID-19 at the moment, having to look at online services, and it's good to finally be getting back to being able to meet in person again. I was just talking to someone the other day who lives down in Adelaide, and they were just talking about how great it is that this coming Sunday they can finally have like a service in person. Of course, you're going to have to, take a few pews out, social distance and all that, but it's just good again to be able to have everybody in the same building again.
Oh, absolutely. One of the good things I've taken away from this season, though, was to move to Zoom prayer meetings. And I'm fortunate I've got a wonderful group of people who I do regularly pray with. So I found that with my travel with work, and it ain't glamorous travel, it's get in the car and start driving, connecting with people around the state. I hold responsibilities as a shadow minister as well as representing my area. So to have a group that you regularly meet with, aside from going to church, has been really important to me as well. And when COVID hit, we couldn't meet in person. We moved to Zoom meetings, and I kind of like it. It's not a big group, but that's been a positive thing that I've taken out of this season. And I know there's a lot of people who've probably done that as well.
I think another blessing, and this really goes to show that God works all things together for our good, that there's now been a lot more online resources being put out by churches. So I don't know how it is in like a lot of your denominations, but like in Lutheranism, there was always, there was a few pastors that put their sermons up online and stuff like that. But now with COVID, they've all basically had to. And so now there's just all this resources and information all over the place. So you can actually get a whole big range of information rather than just a few little bits here and there.
Well, you're obviously having to deal with that as a minister, and I don't envy people not only preaching each week, but looking at how to provide messages that continue to feed the heart as well as guide the journey. I think there are some silver linings, though one of the concerns I've had just recently, I've been talking with a lot of people in the youth sector, and tragically in the last couple of weeks, I've been informed by some workers in the youth sector about some youth suicides, and it always breaks your heart, but also you ask the questions, what more can we do? And the question the point that was posed to me by this youth worker was that there were young people who were coping when they were able to be engaged, in this case, in exercise. And this was someone who had quite a structured outreach in their lives. I'm sorry, I don't know what their faith background was, but they were engaged and happy in exercise and training. And when they weren't able to go to gym, suddenly they were disconnected from what gave them purpose and helped keep them mentally healthy. So I think we have to be aware that there will be people who, through the isolation, the removal of some of their usual ways of being healthy mentally as well as physically, because the two go hand in hand, who've faced additional challenges. And I think that's something that we need to keep our eyes open to. And I'm challenged by that not everyone has done well through this season.
I do think mental health has really been a big issue to suffer from the COVID lockdown, and not just the exercise and physical health, but just not being able to go and visit friends and family, or again with churches, people just need that physical contact. I know Martin Luther, back in the 1500s, one of his letters of spiritual care, a woman had written to him and said that her husband had been suffering from depression and had, I think even attempted suicide and stuff like that. And Luther wrote to her saying that one of his best advice was, well, don't let him be alone. Surround him with friends and family. And he says, because it's in those moments of isolation that the devil gets to us and that we suffer the most. And so we actually need, God has created humans for community, and so we're not really meant to be isolated creatures.
Yeah, as you were saying that, it was an interesting, I could actually had a picture, if you like, because sometimes I think of analogies. So it looked like, we're a little bit like birds in the forest, and that if you sing alone, the forest is rather lonely, but we sometimes need other people, if you like, other people singing, or in this case, engaging with us. So our coping mechanisms, or what we enjoy, is okay, and others are more particularly predisposed who need more of that company. So if it's not the voices of those who are supportive and caring, it can be other voices that people can listen to. And I think that's where the challenge to be able to keep that community in the midst of those times of physical challenge. And that's obviously always really challenging. So friends and family, no doubt, find that something that they do their best, but we don't always know what's happening in someone's head when people become physically isolated as well. So let's kind of keep that one to the forefront, because it breaks your heart every time you hear that someone whose life of potential, whether it's young or older, has been cut short because of those issues, tipping them beyond that point of coping.
Cool. So moving on with the questions, the number 3 is, which political party do you belong to?
I'm a member of the Liberal National Party in Queensland, or the LNP. We're a merged party, and I've been a member. Actually, I was a member of the National Party originally, and I was part of the merger movement a number of years ago when we merged in Queensland into one party.
Just with that, 2 questions. 1, is the merger only in Queensland? And 2, when did that merger take place?
We merged in 2008, I believe. I have to recall now. We merged in 2008. It is only in Queensland, and it was because we had spent a lot of time competing against each other and sometimes fighting against each other, and we realised we could be more successful together. We had more in common together, even though, sure, like any political party or organisation, there are a spectrum of views as well, but we do have a common cause and more that we share together. In other states, they usually work as a coalition, not always, and that's been the traditional model of the partnership with the Liberal and National Party. Queensland, we decided to merge.
And so, just for our listeners then, explaining exactly what area your seat covers.
Yeah, well, look, I've got the hardship post of this gorgeous Sunshine Coast area in Queensland. So I represent the state seat of Maroochydore, which is just south of Coolum and goes down to Mooloolaba on the Sunshine Coast, which is about 100 kilometres north of Brisbane.
And because you're a state member, you'll be coming up for the election later this year. How long have you been the member of the seat there at Maroochydore?
Well, I've been the member since 1992. So I'm currently the longest serving state member in the parliament, which it amazes me because when I was elected, I was only 27 years old. So you can work out how old I am. But it was never my intention to, when you put your hand up and say, I want to have a go at this, I think I can do a better job than the other mob. And I put myself forward. You don't know if you'll be successful even in winning the first time you stand. So it's obviously been a journey of one that I've been privileged to represent this area. Been many challenges, but it's just such an incredible honour where you get to walk through many areas of a community and their challenges. And currently, obviously, with COVID, that's been one of the biggest challenges we've faced. And you're very much in a service role in being out there, particularly when we couldn't meet people, but we had a lot of people contacting us and we're contacting them by phone and by email, trying to support them, and still are. That's an ongoing process.
Just with the effects of COVID, because you're on the Sunshine Coast there, that's one of the main kind of tourist attractions in Queensland. Basically our coastline is one of our biggest features. So how has your seat been impacted kind of just generally by COVID, but more specifically in like the tourism industry from the COVID lockdown?
Thanks, Jake. It's been about 1 in 10 jobs that have been impacted, that have gone, which is huge. So we're very reliant upon retail and tourism, hospitality, and it's a fun place to come to, and a lot of visitors we depend on as part of our economy. So that's been a real impact. And the restrictions are starting to lift, but obviously there's still an impact upon people's ability to travel, and school holidays are often when people make the money, and that helps them go through some of the leaner times. So that has been a real challenge, and one that people are still, I think, unfolding what their pathway to recovery will be, because unfortunately some won't recover and others they're hanging in there and they're fighting hard. But the things are opening up again, and that is a positive and something that we're keen to support them in any way. So hopefully more people can come and visit us and see what a great area we've got.
So the next question is, what do you think is the relationship between your Christian values and beliefs and your political values and beliefs? So I know, just to explain that a bit better, I know that some politicians like to have this complete separation of church and state and keep those right away, and some people like to allow their Christian values to impact their political values. So whereabouts would you consider your relationship between yours?
I believe that I'm called to serve people. That doesn't mean that you're called to convert people. I actually don't believe as a Christian I convert anybody. That is an issue between how how Jesus calls someone's heart to him. You don't convert people. That's his role. What you do is you represent his hands on earth. You represent the care that he has provided you, and hopefully you shine that light as well. So I believe in the principle of the salt and light. And the salt and light is that you are called to provide light, if you like. That can metaphorically mean different things for different people, but it is to shine his light of love and care into the community. And the salt principle, you don't have to be in the majority to have an impact. I very much believe in marketplace Christianity. Get beyond the walls of the church. Don't allow people to box you up. When people talk about separation of faith and the community, they're getting it mixed up as to what the separation of church and state was about. There's very, very strong historical reasons why separation of church and state occurred, particularly in some of the New World democracies. where it was enshrined to be very clear. It wasn't about establishing new religions. It wasn't about establishing a church-run democracy. That's the separation, where it's got mixed up in some people's minds. They think it's about taking people of faith out of the community and shutting them down. In fact, that's the very opposite of what our democracies are about. A liberal democracy should be able to tolerate people of different faith and values, but also respect the individual faith and values. So for me, to live one's Christian faith is to not be shut down behind four walls. You must be out there. Does that mean I go out and preach A to Z of the gospel, or from the beginning to the end? No. You live your life in a way that you reach out to help people wherever they're coming from. Does that sort of answer your question?
I believe so. I was just going to comment on there because I liked the comments you're making about how it's not us that does the conversion. It's, it's a matter between God and the individual. And it reminds me of a great Luther quote where he makes the point. He says, I didn't do conversion. He said, all I did was preach. And then while I ate, slept, and drank Wittenberg ale, the Holy Spirit was at work doing everything.
That's good. There's a scripture that talks about, and you'll be able to find it better than I will, about you lift up Jesus and he'll draw men and women unto him. And I have been so fortunate to have grown up in a household where my parents did take us to Sunday school and lived out their Christian faith and how they served others and raised us as kids, prayed with us at our bedsides. However, it was very much about the choices. They raise you and it's your choice what you end up deciding, even though you're influenced by your upbringing. And for me, I was living in a Buddhist Shinto country when I actually chose to come to a faith as a young adult. And I tell you what, it's pretty awesome to live at that time in a country with these wonderful people with their incredibly deep history. But to believe that if you actually call out to God and say, I want to know who you are, I want to know what the truth is, and he can meet you wherever you are, regardless of access to traditional churches even, though it helps. He's a God of the universe. If we ask him to reveal himself and then still enough to listen and to hear, it's amazing what you'll hear. And that was quite an amazing journey for me. And it's ongoing because I think sometimes we get so busy, we don't take the time to listen to that small, quiet voice. God doesn't always speak in the big booming storms. It's often in the stillness when we allow ourselves to actually hear him.
I like your comments there about crying out to God and for him to reveal himself. It's in Luke's Gospel where he talks about the ask and you shall receive, knock and it shall be open to you, seek and you'll find. And then he goes, if us parents know how to give good gifts to our children, then how much more shall our Heavenly Father give his Holy Spirit to whoever asks for it?
Yeah, that sums it up. God of the universe actually wants to know us personally. I also find it amazing when you hear the testimonies, the stories, personal experiences of people who've come out of the Islamic faith, who have this incredibly interesting background, and they give an insight to their life, in this case some Arab Christians, and their journey to faith in Jesus, where they have done exactly what you just talked about, where they actually cried out to God and he revealed Jesus. And I don't pretend to have great deep theology and the background of understanding across all the different faith groups, but one thing is true. When you ask the God of the universe to reveal yourself, and we believe that Jesus is God, and people who've seen Jesus in places who've come from very different backgrounds, and that's quite an exciting thing. And he is someone who is not to be feared. He's someone to be invited in, and it literally does transform your life.
I do like that image of the crying out to God, and he won't not help you if you ask him for it. There's if you know the TV show Little House on the Prairie, there's an episode on that I always think of that scene when I think of this concept of, there's an episode where there's this old man, his wife died probably like 30 years or so ago, and he's never really stopped grieving her because he's been unable to let go. And of course in the show, the Ingalls family try to help him to then believe in life after death and in God. And there's just a great line where he's just like, I want to believe, help me to believe, to them.
Yeah, well, we've all been created so different. So I do believe that God will do whatever it takes. And he's not only patient, he understands that people do come to faith through different ways. And for some it's easy, and for others it can be a more of a questioning, and that's fine. He's the God of the universe. I think he can handle our questions.
Cool. So moving on back to the questions. What do you think is the most important aspect of Christianity?
Well, what's the most important aspect? I think it's that personal aspect. So this is not some paper-based world religion. It's personal. And that, behold, he's knocking at the door of our hearts. Now, that can be a fairly scary thing for people, and I appreciate there are those who've come to faith from an atheistic background where that's a bit of a revelation, or they may come through other historic religions or very different backgrounds. But it's personal. It's not an academic, dusty, put it on the shelf. And it's also, if you like, it's a challenge to believe that he's a God of the universe. We have questions. Don't be frightened to ask. Might be surprised what that investigation of faith actually reveals.
So the final question that I have for everyone is to ask that, in regards to your Christian beliefs, what do you think is the most crucial matter in Australian politics? And I tell people that I put the qualifier on this as to, in regards to your Christian beliefs, that, in regards to like your political views, you may think something like tourism or something is a really big issue, but then in regards to your religious belief, you may think something like religious freedom is a big issue. So from your Christian worldview, what do you think is the most crucial matter today in Australian politics?
Yeah, look, there are obviously different issues that might come to the fore at different times. At the moment, I'm most concerned in regard to the move for assisted suicide, voluntary, some will call it voluntary assisted death, some call it euthanasia, but essentially it's legalised assisted suicide. And I have a great concern about the vulnerable people in our community not only being coerced by neglect, coerced by feeling they're a burden and they have some form of duty to go this way, or a diminution, if that's all right, a reduction in people's view of their self-worth, and that they somehow are better off dead. And it's a complex issue. No one wants to see anyone die in pain. And when you talk to palliative care experts and people who know modern palliative expert care, not stuff that was done in a bogus, dodgy way where people didn't get access to quality care, but modern palliative care specialists say it's a very minute number. We're talking splitting percentages that can't be helped in regard to relief of pain. So why are there people who are dying in pain when they face terminal illness? Well, that I think it's a disgrace. But part of addressing that failure to get the help that people can get and should get is not misleading people about the care that is possible to relieve pain. And so I am concerned when people say, well, it's a personal choice. If you bring in euthanasia, it won't affect everybody else. Yes, it does. In the same way we've seen with the COVID virus, our behaviour as a community impacts others. Yes, we have certain individual rights as individuals in a democratic society. The problem is when you start legalising suicide there's a creep that goes beyond just those who are terminally ill. And I've just said modern palliative care, it's a very small, very, very small splitting of percentages who cannot be helped with the pain. So the creep is, it goes beyond the terminally ill, it goes to the mentally ill, it goes to children, and that's what's happened around the world, and it affects the culture. It affects the culture of care when the elderly need us to defend and fight for them to have quality care, not to be treated as second-class citizens when they're in nursing homes or in their homes. The quality of care for the disabled, so people don't say, oh, well, they're a bit of a burden, they're better off dead. The quality of care when people start to have a culture of suicide. There is a real curse of suicide in our community that is destroying people's lives. We just talked about it earlier before. So I see this as a major issue. Why is it an issue of faith? Well, it's an issue whether you have faith or not. But for me, all life is precious, and we should fight for the vulnerable. Whether people believe they are precious or not, we have a right to fight for them, and it impacts not only individual choices, it impacts a culture, because once culture is impacted, people don't get the care they should. Everyone's impacted. No one is left out from that impact.
Just with the euthanasia issue then, I know with some of these issues, political parties like to do like a conscience vote and stuff like that. With this issue, is the LNP looking at doing a conscience vote, or do they have a particular position one way or the other?
Traditionally, the Liberal National Party on life issues have afforded a conscience vote to their members. But it's not a blank slate, because there's terrible legislation that doesn't give protection to people when they're vulnerable. We don't have a conscience vote on the criminal code across many serious criminal issues. So these matters should still be subject to deep analysis and scrutiny, because the devil's in the detail. Excuse a metaphor, but it really is. And I think people, even some people who may be pro the concept of voluntary assisted dying or voluntary assisted suicide, have had major problems with some of the legal frameworks around the world. I really hope, Jake, that as this issue comes back to the Queensland Parliament, most likely next year, in about March or April next year, that people don't shut down from having deeper conversations, because I believe that the call for this from those who support it has come about because the care that people should get hasn't been available. Tragically, the call to have voluntary assisted dying or suicide is actually undermining the very care that people should get, because it's misleading people about the care they should get first. And our priority should be to reform health and access before you start changing laws which affect everybody.
So apart from just voting for pro-life political candidates and those who are like anti-euthanasia when we vote, what is there for just us everyday citizens? What other things can we do to help in this situation?
Yeah, look, I think to go and see your local members of parliament, go and see your state members, engage with them now, have those conversations now, understand what this actually means, and become informed, and don't disengage, because there's power in individual voices. There's also power in being informed. For example, there are polls people do where they say, oh, the majority of people are pro voluntary assisted suicide, and then you ask different questions, more probing questions. You break the issues down, and you find that the majority of people don't support doctors being able to help people suicide who aren't terminally ill. The figures actually almost flip the other way. And so get informed, understand this. We do need to have health reform, and information and education about the kind of care that people need, to walk alongside of people when they need that care as well, and help fight for them to get access to it. But with regard to people changing laws that undermine care and access, get along to your members of parliament, get to know them, and make your voice known.
Well, thank you. That's the end of the questions I have. Do you have any further comments you'd like to add about faith and politics before we wrap up the episode?
Thanks, Jake. Yes, I really want to encourage people, be the salt and light, be out in the marketplace of life. There are those who are called to be in the pulpit, to be in the congregation as ministers such as yourself, and that is a noble and worthy cause to care for people. But we all get to do that role. We get to walk out our faith along those highways and those byways. So whether you're called to be in Parliament, or called to be a teacher, or called to be a doctor, or called to pump petrol, it is as much a call as a Christian as it is to have formal ministry. And we're called to care for our community, to hold up that light of love, and not be afraid to step forward and to be part of our community. So God bless you. It's been great to have a chat.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. I hope the listeners have enjoyed this episode. And I hope they can join us again next time with whoever I get on for my next interview. Goodbye and God bless.